So, hello, Amber.
Hi, Luke.
Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
Just you today, then?
Just me, no Paul.
Where is Paul?
God knows. He's working. He's working hard. He's got his show like 3 times a week, and then he's going to go on tour. So he's busy. He is.
He's a busy man. But we need to get the two of you back in here. But anyway, it's you this time.
Yeah.
I thought that I could invite you back on the show to talk about stories of Paris, because you know there's a whole wealth of knowledge and information in your brain, because as well as just generally having a lovely voice, you know all these things about Paris and stuff. I mean, you're a registered tour guide, as probably most people know. I don't need to say that, probably everyone knows. But how come you know so much about Paris?
Well, so I started a podcast about Paris. Well, I started guiding in Paris, and I thought, I really need to learn stuff. But there's so much to learn. It's hard to get a grip on it. And I thought, and I like podcasts, obviously, and I thought, I'll start a podcast about Paris, and it'll help guide my research and bring it together, and then I'll remember it, which I do not.
It's like me. If I prepare for an episode, I'll read up on it, and I'll become sort of an expert on that particular subject, and then I publish it, and then
it's gone.
Months later, the information's completely gone.
Absolutely gone. Yeah, exactly. Some of it stays, but it's a really great excuse, because I really have a problem, I'd almost say, buying books about Paris. If I see a book about Paris, I want it. And so I have an enormous amount of books about Paris and people that have lived here, and events and all sorts of things. And I find it fascinating, and I love reading the books. And each time I read one, I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. Obviously, forget it by the time I finish the book.
Any favourite books about Paris?
Oh, gosh, any favourite books? There's books which are like those anthologies of Paris, which are quite nice, like the Andrew Hussey or stuff like that, which are sort of like the 7 Ages of Paris. And
Sorry, I'm just pushing your chair
closer to the microphone.
Listeners, you didn't get that, but I'm still trying to rearrange the room here, and as very rudely, as Amber was talking, I was actually moving her chair into a slightly different position. What's going to make you more comfortable?
Always good for me.
That's fine.
You tell me. The microphone also moves.
I'm still moving Amber's chair. Okay.
We'll find the perfect spot.
Sorry, what did you say about your favourite book? I was too obsessed with moving your chair to...
Got to get the sound. You got to get the positions right. No, I don't know. There's anthologies of Paris. So the ones which are like the 7 Ages of Paris, or I think that's by Andrew Hussey, and they are really good. But obviously, the more I delve into it, the more I want the deep, obscure information. There's this book called Hidden Paris, or Lost Paris, Walk Through Lost Paris. I think that's by this guy called Leonardo Pitt, who actually went to Lecoq, and I love that book. That's a really fantastic book.
What makes a good book about Paris?
I think precise details.
Yes. And
not kind of just like, Paris, it's so beautiful. It is beautiful, and I do really love Paris and walking around it, but I want to get to the nitty gritty. I want to get down to some sort of weird, obscure thing.
Violent story of some kind.
Yeah, I do like it a bit dark and violent, and I like the way you can walk past. So there's this, in the Marais is beautiful. And there's this sort of wall that's sticking out of the library, and it looks like maybe it was part of that building, and you're just sort of on your way to Cos or, the Marais, doing some fancy shopping and having a nice time. But it's part of a prison. And this prison used to be the women's prison. And during the revolution, just terrible scenes of massacre that took place at this prison. God. And we sort of stroll past it every day, and we can touch this wall, which feels so sort of, for me anyway, kind of powerful, this link to the past of Paris, which is so long, and I love that.
Okay, so you started your podcast. It's called Paname Podcast.
Yeah.
And does it have a particular kind of what's the word for it, concept? Does it have a particular kind of concept?
Yes. So I sort of start, what do I say when I start? I say, you're listening to Paname, a podcast about Paris, the events that have taken place, the people that have lived here, and the traces they've left behind. And what I try to do, and this is personally for me, although I don't know that I always do, in each episode is find something concrete, like find something tangible that you can see and touch and visit, which links you specifically to the story that I'm going to tell. So it could be that wall, you can see that wall and touch it and be like, oh, this is the September massacres. This is where they took place. And so it kind of gives some frame to the story. So yeah, a real thing.
You use a lot of sound effects as well, right? You go to the locations and get the sounds of like the crows in Père Lachaise graveyard and other atmospheric sound effects. So you kind of like bring Paris to the ears of the listener kind of thing.
Yes, and sometimes it's different. Sometimes I do have to cheat because Paris is noisy. Sometimes you're like, well, this is the actual street, but there's loads of bloody roadworks, and so you like go around the corner. Yeah. But it's just that for me is just a way to visit those places as well, because you learn about something. Okay, if it's the Marais, you've probably been there, but there's all sorts of little corners of Paris you've not gone to, so it's kind of an opportunity to see it yourself.
Okay. Yeah. And I bet that you've kind of discovered some interesting stories about Paris. Can you share a couple of those stories with us today?
I absolutely can, Luke.
Okay, this is the sort of stuff that you can hear, that people can hear on your podcast normally.
Yeah.
But we're going to get a special sort of Paname Podcast crossover with Luke's English podcast today.
Yeah.
All right, so cool. Paris stories. Great.
Paris stories. Well, and you see, the thing is, sometimes they start as one story and then they get a bit large. So, okay, the story I'd like to tell you today started as a story about the gibbet of Montfaucon. Do you know what a gibbet is?
It's a kind of piece of wood, isn't it? No? What is a gibbet?
Yeah. It's so I do quite like a story that's a bit dark. I do enjoy it if there's a bit of death in my podcast. I don't know why.
Violent death.
Violent death, yeah.
Lovely.
That's what we like. So a gibbet it's like a gallows. Whereas a gallows, you'd hang someone and then you might take them down. So it's like, okay, you've been executed and now you're gone. A gibbet is specifically designed to display the bodies for an extended period of time. So
people who've been executed, they may have been hanged on a gallows, as you said, and then they get put up on a gibbet to say to everyone, look, don't be a naughty boy or that's what will happen to you.
Absolutely.
They put you on a gibbet. Okay, what does a gibbet look like? What's it made of?
So, and you could be hanged there as well to begin with. So the gibbet at the Montfaucon is basically Colonel Fabien today. So you know Place Colonel Fabien,
Paris.
Yeah, it's in the 10th. It's like the end. It's like the corner of like the 10th and the 19th, sort of around there. And it's very nice. It's where the communist headquarters is.
Okay.
And this used to be the biggest gibbet in Paris, and so there were a few, and this one has kind of gone into legend because it's in stories like Alexander Dumas, he talks about it, and Victor Hugo. This, it's in everything's in Victor Hugo.
All of those sort of famous books written by things like the Three Musketeers and
the Reine,
Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yes. So the Hunchback of Notre Dame, he goes over to that gibbet at the end. Spoiler. It was written in 1830. I think it's okay.
It's not. Yeah, it's been enough time has passed since that book was written and published for spoilers.
So that's in it, and it's La Reine Margot, the Queen Margot. By Alexander Dumas. But Alexander Dumas did write The Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo, which is a great book.
Okay. So this gibbet, was it a large thing?
Enormous.
Lots of bodies.
Huge. Really, really big.
Wow. Imagine that. Imagine in a main city like that, a whole sort of block, I suppose, like a kind of building block or a corner, would have been just dedicated to displaying the bodies of executed criminals.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that would have been a gruesome thing to see.
Horrible.
There would have been birds and stuff.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And scavengers.
People
and animals.
Right. Different kinds of animals coming to scavenge.
Yes, absolutely.
And people maybe trying to rob bits and pieces.
Rob them, and also witchcraft, because we're talking about medieval times.
Wow.
So there was, the sort of hair of a hangman's head. It's a bit Shakespeare, isn't it?
Yeah, because not that I know anything about witchcraft, but I think that if what I've learnt is true, then a lot of it is about using certain ingredients that have a certain potency to them. And maybe the hair of a man who's been hanged might have been quite a potent ingredient for some sort of potion. Wow. Okay. So there would have been witches and stuff coming along to scavenge. Yeah.
Arguably.
Yeah.
But, or even their family who want to cut them down and bury them.
Right.
More to the point, you know, if your loved one had been hung and displayed, you know, or hanged and displayed, it's not great. So it started with that story, this story that I'm about to tell you. And so this gibbet was enormous, and Colonel Fabien is on a hill. A little bit, you know.
Yeah.
You've got to go up the Grand Jobel to get to it.
Yeah.
So it's high, and you could see it from far away. Like, the whole point that displaying bodies is about telling people, okay, you know, don't do this, or this is going to happen to you, and it's humiliating. And for Christians, it's, you know, terrible. I mean, for everyone. For everyone.
Getting hanged until you're dead and then being displayed there while the crows eat your flesh. Yeah, that's horrible for everyone. Yeah.
Horrible for everyone. And so I was interested in this, and there's a song, and it sort of has this, I love the way that some of these things pass into language and culture, and I learn about them too, like modern culture as well, because, you know, we're not French, we live here. And I think for French people, they might have heard this because Serge Gainsbourg, he has a song where he references the gibbet of Montfaucon, which is fascinating, isn't it? You know, he knows what it is, they know what it is, we don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's a part of the culture, yeah. Exactly.
So I started like researching this story, and like there's nothing left of this gibbet.
What is it there now? Do you know?
Well, it's a roundabout. And the communist
a
headquarters.
junction, a driving junction.
Okay. And just houses, modern houses.
Yeah. I wonder if any of those houses are haunted, Amber.
Probably they're haunted because it was there for a really long time.
I mean, I say, I wonder if those places are haunted, and you say, yeah, probably. I mean, I don't know, where do you stand on that sort of thing? Do you think it's possible that there are ghosts and spirits that haunt places where people had untimely deaths and things like that? Do you think that's possible?
I don't know. I mean, Colonel Fabien is not a very pleasant place. It's a bit of a grim roundabout. I don't know. I don't think so. I think maybe it depends on how well it's preserved.
I mean, if the place had been pretty much the way it was before, you think then it would be more haunted, because the ghosts would be like, you did a good job, it's nicely preserved, we'll stay here. But if you build a car park there, it's not very chic, is it, for ghosts to haunt a car park? They'll be like, no, I'm not going to haunt this, it's a fucking car park. See ya.
What do you think?
I don't know. I like to imagine that ghosts are real, but I don't like to believe they're real, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? You know, I wouldn't want to believe they're real, because then that would be terrifying. But there are times when I like to imagine it and just fantasize about the idea. That I find to be fun and interesting. But ultimately, I hope that ghosts aren't real.
I agree. I don't think they're real. But I think there's something about what I was saying about finding something that was there at the time of, which makes you feel like it's not a ghost, but it's sort of imbued with the power of that. It's witnessed the real event.
There is some way in which ghosts can be real, in the sense that stuff from the past can leave its mark on the present in some way, and that could, you know, just be, I don't really know, but if there's some connection between the past and the present that's still there, and so it still is essentially kind of able to do things in the same way that it could in the past, there's a sense of it, maybe a connection to that's a bit like a haunting. But anyway, So so this gibbet then.
So I started looking into this gibbet, and I wanted to, I've sort of been interested in it for a while, and there's quite a lot of famous hangings there. But I came across this one guy called Olivier de Clisson, the fourth.
Okay, the fourth of the Olivier de Clisson
the fourth
collection.
And it was his story that really was like, oh, this is a good story, and ended up being a double episode. So we got the sort of gibbet, but it was his wife that was the real story.
So Olivier de Clisson the fourth was put on the gibbet. Was he?
He was hung. Yeah.
What did he do wrong? Contentious, is it?
It is contentious. So we are in the 14th century, and so that's and so what's going on in France? We've got the 100 Years' War, which, in a nutshell, is basically France and England kind of going at it about who should really control France, really, and who should be king. And bearing in mind that England sort of had land in France, there was Burgundy and places in Normandy. So France didn't have quite the same borders as it does today. But so there's the 100 Years' War, which is going on. But Olivier de Clisson and his wife, because this is a great story, because I've led you astray by going down the gibbet, really.
Yeah. So we can just leave the gibbet behind, maybe come back to it later.
Because it's sort of a story, it's painted as a story of like, I'm terrible at burying the lead, but it's painted as a story of like love and revenge and vengeance and blood and all the rest of it. But this is how I got into it, so I'll start. So there's the 100 Years' War, which is going on at the same time. So that's sort of there. So England and France are kind of getting into it. And we're looking specifically at Olivier and his wife, Jeanne, and they're from Brittany. And Brittany is in the northwest of France, and it's by the sea, and it's got this very strong culture and identity. Today as well, people are Breton, and they say like, oh, I'm not French, I'm Breton,
Yeah.
And it did then. And so there's the war going on between England and France, the 100 Years' War, and there's also a war of Breton succession, which is basically who's going to be in charge of Brittany. So the Duke of Brittany dies, and they're like, okay, time for a new duke. So there's these sort of double wars going on. And Olivier de Clisson and his wife are really wealthy. They have got loads of land, and it's really good land because it's salt marshes.
It's in Brittany.
In Brittany.
Right.
She came to this was her third marriage, Jeanne. So she has 7 children. She's been married twice, so one was annulled, one died. So she comes with her family's land that she inherited, the land from her husband who died. And then Olivier has his own land. So these two have got lots of land, and the land is salt marshes, some of it, which is really valuable because salt is how you preserve food. So they're really wealthy. And they've got all this lovely money and this land, and they're Breton and they're nobles, so they're fancy people. And then they go to war. There's some sort of skirmishes with the English.
Okay, with the English.
With the English. So Olivier's gang, Breton/French, they have some skirmish with the English. And Olivier is captured, and he's swapped with a prisoner swap. They say, okay, we're going to give you back the Earl of blah-de-blah for Olivier de Clisson.
That's what they're still doing these days.
Absolutely.
Like one side has one prisoner, the other one another prisoner, and they switch. Okay.
Yeah. And so they switch Olivier for an English dude. But then this other guy in Brittany who fancies himself the Duke, he sort of starts being a bit like, oh, they didn't give us much money. Like the ransom was very low, and it felt a bit... He kind of implied that Olivier was a traitor and was working for the English.
He was like a secret agent, a double agent.
Yeah, he was a double agent. Sorry, I'll turn that on silent. He was a double agent, and he was like working for the English.
This is what this other dude suggested.
Yes.
Who's the other dude?
He wanted to be the Duke of Brittany. I can't remember his name. I think it might have been Charles.
Okay, the would-be Duke of Brittany.
Yeah, exactly. And he was chums with the King of France, Philip.
Okay.
Philip of Valois. And so he sort of says to the king, I don't trust Olivier. This feels dodgy to me. I think Olivier is double-crossing us. And so the king invites Olivier and some friends down to Paris for a jousting match.
As you do.
Absolutely. It's the Middle Ages.
Jousting? What's that?
That's when you're on 2 horses, you're on opposite ends. It's like in those Renaissance fairs that Americans like. And you've got the long stick and you sort of charge towards each other.
Yeah,
Game
exactly.
of Thrones.
One horse on... Do they do that in Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
Jousting,
They
really?
joust, yeah.
So there's one guy on a horse with armour on, probably, or a shield. Another guy on a horse, and they face each other, and they've got these huge, big sticks, jousts. Are they called jousts?
I don't know. I think so.
And they ride along, and they have to try and whack the other person off the horse with their big stick. Jousting.
Jousting, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, so Olivier, he's a medieval sort of, duke. He's like, yeah, jousting.
Jousting, it's my thing, isn't it? It's what I do.
Yeah, so he hops off to Paris, leaves his wife, 7 kids, all the land to get on with it.
He goes to Paris to do some jousting.
To joust, yeah, because the king is all like, oh, this particular skirmish is over. Let's all celebrate with a joust. Okay. But it's a trick. It's a ploy, and he accuses him of being a traitor. And he is found guilty because...
He is a traitor?
I have read both, but more often I've read no. He absolutely wasn't. He was loyal to the crown.
Okay.
Why might the king have wanted to kill him?
To get that land? Because he fancied his wife?
Well, to get all that lovely, wealthy land.
Yeah.
If you've got a lot of money and land, it makes people jealous.
Yeah.
So was he really a traitor? Doesn't really feel like it. But he was like, you're a traitor. And they executed him. And then they hanged him. They beheaded him. They hanged his body from the armpits off the gibbet and sent his head to Brittany, to Nantes, to the capital of Brittany, as an example to everyone, to be like, this is what happens to traitors. So his wife is in a real pickle because now she's a traitor. You know, she's got no rights. This is the medieval times, either the 1300s. It's like your husband's a traitor. Goodbye.
By default, you're a traitor too because you're essentially attached to your husband.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's very difficult for her, and she really had very few options. She could have joined a convent and sort of kept her head down, and that probably is what most women would have done. But it also means that her children are now, screwed really, because they've got no future. They've gone from being wealthy, landowning, titles, all the rest of it, having this bright future, to basically having nothing. You know?
Just bastard children of a traitor.
Absolutely. And so she's like, no, sir, not on my watch.
Oh, right, really? And she gets a sword and go. Anyway.
Yeah.
In the movie version, probably.
Well, this is it. So the thing is, there is some historical information about her, although not much because it was really a long time ago. But it has merged with modern retellings. So there was a sort of book written by this guy. So when was it? Was it the 19th century? I can't quite remember, but much more modern. Hundreds of years afterwards, which retells her story, and it's very romantic. And you'll see why, because it's a great story. Mm-hmm. So she decides that she will not let this stand. And so she takes her children, just 2 of them, just Guillaume.
2 of the 7.
Yeah, I don't know what's happened to the rest of them.
Yeah.
They've gone. Some of them are dead. Some of them have left. Who knows? She's taken 2. She takes her 2 boys, Guillaume and Olivier, and she goes to Nantes to see the head of their father, her husband, and sort of swears vengeance on the king and curses the king, and is just like, no way.
I will find you. I will hunt you down and I will kill you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. That's what she does. And so she's like, okay, I'm gonna do it. And she's got to act quick because basically it's like, she's...
Yeah, they're going to come for her next.
Yeah.
So it's like, Mum, what are we going to do? They're going to come and get us. No, you're wrong. We're going to get them.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So she's like, right. So then she goes to this castle up in Brittany where they know her. And she's just like, oh, hey, you know me. I just want to pop in and say hi. What they don't know in this castle is she's raised a sort of army. Oh. And this is a castle loyal to the guy who said to the king, who I want to say is Charles, that her husband was a traitor. So she goes into the castle. They're like, oh, hey, Jeanne, come on in. And so she pops in, and then she's like, not really. And she lets in her army, and massacres them and steals stuff from the...
Wow. So this is the place in where? In Nantes?
This is somewhere in Brittany.
In Brittany.
Yeah.
And this is the place associated with the guy who said that her husband was a traitor to the king.
It was someone who was loyal to the crown but it was basically just like an act of like, I'm coming for you.
It's proper Game of Thrones stuff, this, isn't it?
Yeah,
where
completely.
the wife is, like her husband has been betrayed and killed, and there are guys on horses approaching her house, and so she quickly packs a bag and puts a sword and a dagger in there, brings 2 of her children, and off they go on a mission of vengeance. The first stop is to sort out the people who betrayed him to the king.
Yeah.
And slaughtered them all.
Yeah.
And then?
Well, exactly. I don't know, it's exactly the guy that betrayed him, but needless. So then she's like, okay, so she's got some money, she raises some money, and she can't stay in France. So she takes to the high seas. Well, she takes to the Channel, which is less exciting.
She gets on a boat into the English Channel, yeah? Okay.
She buys a fleet of ships.
Wow, really? A fleet? A whole fleet?
Well, at least 3.
Okay.
I've read different numbers, but she's got a number of ships. Well, a collective noun of ship.
Yeah. If it's more than 2, it's a fleet, isn't it?
It's a fleet.
Yeah.
A small fleet of ships. And this is where we get into a sort of where does the story end? But this is the story.
Yeah.
So she has this fleet of ships. She's, of course, in the flagship, which she calls My Revenge. She gives it a name, obviously. She paints the ships black, so they look sort of scary.
So this is one of those epic films where now we're on boats, and it's like suddenly become a kind of a seafaring epic pirate adventure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pirate, exactly.
She paints the boats black.
She paints, they're called the Black Fleet. So she paints the boats black, and then she hoists the sails, and they're blood red. So she's got these red sails, these black ships, and she terrorizes the coast. You know, she's Breton, so you can imagine she's a seafaring person because they're sort of famous, you know, they're by the sea.
Yeah.
And she terrorizes the French fleets and anyone loyal to the king. And the story very much goes that when she captures a vessel, a French vessel, they execute everyone on board, her personally, with an axe. With an axe.
Wow.
Decapitating, you know, nobles especially, but she always leaves one alive.
One person to tell the tale to the others. Oh my god.
To tell the tale and to tell the king that she is
coming.
She's coming. Now, that sounds really dramatic, but there does seem some truth that she did definitely take to the seas. Now, whether she painted the ships black and had red sails, but there is definite sort of she was on the seas.
Yeah.
So she's doing this and she's sort of terrorizing, and she kind of has no choice. She's got no land. She's got no money.
Yeah.
And so this is what she's doing. And she's doing this for a while. And then finally the French fleet managed to almost capture her. And she escapes on some small vessel. It gets murky, but one of her children die. And Guillaume, he doesn't make it. But she makes it to England.
Ah.
And she is welcomed by these records as well that they have in England of them inviting her to the court. And it's a sort of my enemy's enemy is my friend.
Oh, so who's invited?
The King of England.
The King has?
Yeah.
Has it? He's decided, well, I'll make friends with her then.
Well, yeah, he calls her my chère cousine Breton, my dear Breton cousin.
And she's like, sorry, did you not get my emails? I hate you and I want to chop your head off.
No, this is the English king.
Oh, the English king.
She makes it to England.
Oh, I see. I missed a beat there.
Yeah,
so she gets to England. The English king's like, oh, you're wonderful.
Because she hates the French king.
Right.
And so he's like, well, the enemy of my enemy. Give me all the lowdown of the French and the fleet and all the rest of it. And they give her money and ask her advice, and she carries on pirating for them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so this is just bonkers. And then she marries an English nobleman, and they move back to France.
Yeah.
And they're able to sort of regain some lands, and she dies, and she's buried in France. She dies in her 60s.
Wow.
And she's buried in France, but the story is not over. So her son, Olivier de Clisson,
the one who survived,
the fifth, the only one we know about, he continues fighting because it's still the 100 Years' War.
This is Olivier de Clisson the fifth.
The fifth,
now.
yeah. The son.
Yeah.
Who saw his father's head up on Nantes and was there when his mother made this epic sort of curse to the French king.
Yeah.
So he carries on fighting because it's a 100 Years' War. It's still going on.
He's like, we've only been going for 65 years. We've got still got a good 35 years of this left to go. Come on. It's called the 100 Years' War, for goodness sake.
Exactly. So he carries on fighting. But he comes back to France and he switches sides. And because he was fighting with the English.
Ah, yeah, of course.
But he comes back and he switches sides and he starts fighting with the French. And he moves up the ranks, and he gets the nickname of the Butcher.
Nice.
Because we can only presume that maybe some of those stories about his mother are true, that she was
a bit axe happy.
Bit
choppy chop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because he is brutal. He really he has no fear. He was brought up in this sort of brutal world. And he rises to the very top of the French army and becomes something which I don't really still understand. It's called the connétable, which is like it's like in charge of the army, basically. He gets this sort of like very powerful position.
Commander-in-chief kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So he gets back everything that they've lost and more, and completely re-establishes the de Clisson name and builds this gorgeous residence for himself in the Marais.
But is he not a double agent? Or has he completely switched sides?
He's completely switched sides.
What made him switch sides then? Because he was like, I was never really that keen on the English anyway.
I think so, maybe. Yeah. I mean, I suppose in some ways, like the Breton neither French nor English. And maybe he was just, maybe his bigger goal, I mean, we can't really ascribe their motivations. It happened a long time ago. But maybe his bigger goal was to sort of re-establish his name. I think that's what his mother always wanted. She wanted to sort of prove how unfair it was, and that she, everything was taken from them, including their future, and she wanted it back at any price.
Right. And, so it was just naked ambition, sort of just blind ambition to he saw a route to get back to power, and it was through the French side of the army, maybe. Something like that. And
also just the unfairness of it. His father was executed, and he was probably not a traitor.
Yeah.
And with his father's execution, his future was gone too.
So what did Olivier V do then in the end?
So then, he just becomes incredibly powerful and wealthy, and he builds this huge mansion in Paris in the Marais, because at this time, the medieval time, so again, still we're in the 1300s, I wonder if we're already in the 14s, we've still got this was just at the end of the Knights Templar, which were also in the Marais. They had their huge temple. Right,
the Knights Templar, who are these guys then? I mean, we're switching to a different pop culture franchise here, and moving over to Assassin's Creed, the video game, from Game of Thrones to Assassin's Creed. So who are the Knights Templar then?
So the Knights Templar,
English guys, right?
Well,
no?
they're everyone. I don't know loads about them. So the Knights Templar, when you had the Crusades, so when you had like Christians going to Jerusalem and being like, we're going to kill Muslims in a holy war, and God's okay with that.
Our God, anyway.
Our God's cool with that. Yeah, exactly. So when you had the Crusades, and that was, this sort of divine war, you had these warrior monks, which were the Templars, and their mission was to protect the Crusaders.
Warrior monks,
yeah.
And their mission was to protect the Crusaders. Okay, so you got the Crusaders, who are the guys in armour with swords and probably red crosses on their t-shirts.
And others. And all the people that go with it, all the retinue, because you've got the people who are cooking and carrying the bits and bobs and the water and the animals, and because it's a trundling procession of people,
a whole caravan
leaving, from Europe and going to Jerusalem, over land and sea.
Yes, of course.
So it wasn't just, fighters, and they didn't know the way, they didn't know what they were doing.
So there was the Templars and their entourage, and these fighting monks as well.
The Templars are the fighting monks.
The Templars are the fighting monks, but they're there to protect who? Just everyone.
The Crusaders.
And the Crusaders are the missionaries.
Yes.
Right, these are like monks going out there to try and convert everyone to Christianity, and they're like, and if you don't, this guy, see the guy with the huge sword? Yeah, he will chop your head off. So,
Well, some of them would have been like soldiers or would have been able to sort of fight, but some of them wouldn't.
Okay.
And so the Templars were specifically holy because they were monks, but they were also warriors. So they simultaneously prayed and trained.
Prayed and killed.
Praying and killing. Yeah, exactly. And so that was their whole gig. That's what they were doing. And then Jerusalem was taken by Saladin.
Right.
I believe. And basically the sort of Crusades came to an end. There was no reason, they stopped going on them. But the Knights Templar, in creating these links, had also created trade routes and essentially established banking, international banking. And so they became sort of banker monks, and they had loads of money.
So praying and banking.
Praying and banking, yeah, exactly. They were like the first bankers.
Okay.
And the Templars in Paris, they had loads of money. And Paris in the early 1300s was essentially the Ile de la Cité. So where Notre Dame is, that was like where the king was, and that's where most people lived. And the Marais was not really, it was outside Paris. It sort of wasn't really Paris.
What is Marais in English?
It means marsh.
Right, so it's kind of like a marshland outside the centre of the city. At the time. And so the Knights Templar, they drained the marsh and they built a castle, basically. And they built a sort of city within a city. So you had like the king with his money and his sort of stuff going on. And then you had the Knights Templar with their much more money. And their sort of network, huge network, just on his doorstep. And he was not keen. We're like, dude, we're going to build a Muji. We're going to have an H&M. There's going to be a Starbucks, but lots of other cool shops and things. And the king's like, what?
Yeah, exactly. He was like, I don't like this. I'm not into this. Yeah, so the Knights Templar were there. They had all this money. But it also made the Marais in the Middle Ages quite a sort of interesting, important place, which is why we presume Olivier de Clisson built his house there in the Marais, just down the road from the Knights Templar, because it's now, the archives, the Archives Museum. And
I do.
It's part of that. There's a little bit left that you can still see, which is part of his original building.
I see.
And the rest of it's sort of modern and been relatively modern, 17th century.
And how does that connect up with the thing you mentioned before, which was the moment when the prisoners were executed? Female prisoners just nearby.
It's just around the corner.
Just round the corner from there. But that's a separate time.
That's a separate time.
That's sort of revolution stuff in the 18th century. I guess, right? Okay, but still pretty good story about Olivier de, what was his name?
Clisson,
the 4th and the 5th.
Yeah.
And the sort of the way that Olivier V managed to get his reputation and the wealth back. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can still see like a little bit of his house that he built there.
Yeah, fantastic. Wow, what a story. Isn't it insane when you think about how people used to live hundreds of years ago, how brutal and like sadistic and nasty and cruel and violent everything was? How did anyone actually survive and get anything done?
I don't know, it was more brutal and sadistic.
Really?
I think they think it was more boring and grim.
But I mean, public executions, gibbets with bodies hanging from the roof.
I know, yes, of course, that's horrible. The execution sort of aspect to it. But I mean, I don't know. You
mean they didn't have TikTok, so it was more boring? Is that?
Well, you're just like these repetitive days. Like if you were not wealthy.
Repetitive days of like, oh yeah, here we go, nothing to eat, another rat, another dead guy hanging off the roof. Just a normal day, repetitive, boring day.
Regular day. You've got very limited options, don't you?
Yeah, true.
Of what you can do, and even how long you can do it.
How many TV channels were there at that time?
Zero TV channels.
Like not even one, just zero.
But even the length of your day, like if you were an apprentice, let's say you're in Paris, and Paris is pretty dirty and grim, and just all the things that could kill you, just anything that you think of.
All that air pollution.
All the air pollution.
All the cigarette smoke.
But it's just long, and you're an apprentice and you're doing these things, and they're dirty and dangerous, and when the sun goes down,
there's no light.
It's just, what are you going to do?
Just go to bed and just hope that there are no rats.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And
would you like to visit a certain historical period in French history or Parisian history? If you could go back to a certain time, would you do it? Or would it be too dangerous?
Absolutely. I would totally go back. I would love to, but I mean, you kind of want to be able to sort of just walk around for a day and then leave, and obviously not make any sort of, time traveling impact, anything like that. But yeah, definitely just be like, okay, we're going, having a look around. There's loads of times I'd like to see.
Example?
I think I'd love to see Paris before it was renovated by Haussmann. So
you'd like to go and see Paris before it was renovated by Dave Haussmann.
Eugene Baron Haussmann, yes.
Haussmann, who redesigned and rebuilt lots of the city, making it very uniform and with these large, elegant, terraced buildings. So before then, when was that then? When did that happen?
Well, it started in the sort of late 1800s.
Okay.
And then carries on, even though Haussmann and Napoleon III get sort of nixed. It carries on up, and the projects carry on.
What happened to Haussmann?
I think he was.
Did he have his head chopped off? Did he?
No, there was no head chopping off. What happened to Haussmann? That's a good question. I think he was sacked. People got a bit upset, but it was Napoleon III, so he was the person in charge, Napoleon III, and then they go to war with Prussia.
Never a good idea.
Not a good idea. Prussia wins.
And so.
Napoleon is sent to England. He's exiled to England. The worst punishment the French could think of.
The worst punishment the French person could think of. You have to go to England and speak British English. And then the English sent him to St. Helena, right? To a little island in the middle of nowhere.
No, you're confusing him with the other.
I was talking about Napoleon, but that's a different Napoleon.
Napoleons.
There's two Napoleons. Do
you want to know about the two Napoleons?
Well, go on then, because this is because we were talking about Haussmann, and you said you'd like to visit Paris before it got renovated by Haussmann, and then it was like, who is Haussmann? And it's Osman, it's not Haussmann. That's one of my stand-up bits about Haussmann. But anyway, and I said, what happened to Haussmann? And you said because he was like kind of mates with Napoleon III, who invaded Prussia, bad move, and that didn't go well. So I guess when Napoleon III, what happened to Napoleon III?
Well, he gets exiled.
He gets exiled to England.
Yes.
Right, exactly. Where he has to eat like bad food in bad weather and all the rest of it. It's every French person's nightmare.
Yeah.
But then, so all of his cronies also had to kind of run away or something, did they? Like Haussmann basically was like, all right, so I guess our boss is gone, so see you guys. What did he do?
Well, so you had Napoleon III. He gets sort of exiled. Everything goes wrong. And that's 1870. And then there's that big uprising, the Commune, all drama, which is complicated. And then France goes back to being a republic after that. But Haussmann's project, we call it Haussmann, the style of architecture, Haussmannian architecture.
Like this building, right?
Yeah, absolutely, like this building. And so he sort of started that. He sets that in motion. And even though he's not there to oversee all of it, it doesn't matter. You know, the wheels are in place, and they've all got on board with this. You know, Haussmann's sort of the prefect which decides, okay, we're going to make these straight lines, we're going to do all of this. But, you know, I think everyone was like, yeah, this is the style we're going for, and this is what we want to do. And so the projects continue. So you see in Paris, a lot of the buildings are early 1900s, because a lot of the architects write their names into the buildings, and you'll see there'll be 1901, 19 whatever. And
Students of Haussmann.
Students of Haussmann. It's all part of that same project, which starts in the late 1800s.
Okay, so that's the Napoleon III and his mate Haussmann. What happened to the other Napoleon? Napoleon the Fourth?
Napoleon I, Napoleon Bonaparte,
the big Napoleon, the small Napoleon, the one who's actually kind of short, the one that everyone knows. That's Napoleon I, is it? Yeah,
that's Napoleon I.
Yeah.
So Napoleon Bonaparte, he comes about at a really interesting time. So you have the French Revolution in 1789.
Yeah,
and I mean, it's huge, isn't it? Because they are grappling with what they're going to do. So they don't have a revolution and immediately decide to become a republic. There is a period of struggle where they think maybe we can be a constitutional monarchy and we can still have a monarch, but we're going to do things differently. But that doesn't work out. And that's when all the heads roll and the republic is created, the first republic. And so France goes from being a monarchy and everything that entails to becoming a republic, this radical change. And France is the centre of Europe in many ways. And all around Europe, there's kings and queens, you know, Spain and Britain, and everyone is like...
And they're all shitting themselves.
Absolutely. They're just like, whoa, what? Oh, hold on, France, we're not sure. I don't think you wanted to do that. Austria, all of these people, they're just like, no, sir. And so France is kind of in this big... mess, you know, it's messy, the republic and the revolution and everyone losing their heads, and the French want everything to be different, and it's kind of like a bit of a nightmare.
And also when you go from a model where its power is completely centralized around one person, a monarch, and then you go to a republic, you might end up in a republic in which there is kind of one guy in charge of everything too, because that's sort of the natural order. Everyone's like, yeah, okay, you be in charge. Is that what happened?
Well, kind of. I mean, into the breach steps Napoleon, you know. Into
the chaos, into the void steps Napoleon, okay. And
Napoleon Bonaparte, he's got a very complicated legacy. You know, he sort of splits opinion left and right. You know, the right are a bit more pro-Napoleon. Although I think that he did quite a lot. I mean, he did a massive amount. And, people think that Napoleon really waged war and was this big warmonger, when really it seems very much that the rest of Europe were very keen to sort of show France that they can't just have a revolution and that they wanted the monarchy to be returned. Napoleon was a brilliant man in the real genuine sense of the word. Like, he was an exceptional man. Now, he did exceptional things. Like, at a very young age, he had this incredible vision and foresight. You know, he renovates, he completely changes the whole, the schools, the banks, the law system, the army. He's a great general. You know, he's got these incredible sort of ideas and tactics. So he does sort of this fantastic job. And I think the French are like you said, a bit keen to get behind one man, because the difference between an emperor and a king is ridiculous. It's just a question of how they got there. You know, the king, it's sort of hereditary, and the emperor, he sort of like stands up and says, you know, oh, we'll have a democracy. Actually, it's me now. I'll
have a democracy, but you all have to agree to do what I say.
Yeah.
That kind of democracy.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so he sort of does, he does an awful lot, but then he's defeated with Russia. So that didn't go well for him. And that's when he's first exiled to Elba, which is Italy, basically, a little island off of Italy. And then he comes back. He sort of whips Elba into shape and then is like, I've had enough of this. I'm going back to France. And so he goes back to France. And in the meantime, the French have re-established the monarchy. And Napoleon...
He's like, but he arrives. Somebody's
Napoleon arrives, and the king knows he's on his way and sends the army to go and capture Napoleon. And Napoleon, much loved by the army, sort of says, you know, that's what they say, you know, whoever would kill your emperor, you know, here I am. And the army turn around and carry him triumphantly back to Paris because they're pleased as punch. Yeah, he's back. He's an army man, you know. He's all about the army. Yeah. And so then he takes over again, the 100 Days, and then Waterloo. Yeah.
How did you feel when you won the war? What? ABBA released that.
ABBA released Waterloo.
This famous Eurovision Song Contest winning hit, Waterloo.
Yeah. Which England gave them nul point for.
That's 1970. That's not 18. Anyway, 17. We're in the late 18th century, not the late 20th century. Anyway, so when Waterloo happened,
and then he's exiled to St Helena. Which
Waterloo was a big naval battle between the English and the French.
Not naval.
No, not naval.
Not naval.
Okay.
You're thinking Trafalgar.
I'm thinking Trafalgar. Aren't I?
Yeah. It's in Belgium, Waterloo. Yeah, in fact, it was the problem with rain and cannons, if I recall, was a big problem.
I think Waterloo. I think water. You see, so you know, where did the battle take place? On the water and in the Loo, maybe I don't know. But no, it's a place in Belgium, and it was flooded, was it? And they were trying to kill each other, and it was like, oh god.
One of the problems was that it'd been raining, I think, the day before, and so how Napoleon got his heavy artillery out. There was stuff like that happening.
So they had infrastructure issues. That's their excuse anyway to losing to the British.
Yeah.
Okay, and then so that was the end of Napoleon.
End of Napoleon 1, and then he was exiled to St Helena, which is miles away.
Yeah, it's way down in the South Atlantic, in the middle of the nowhere. Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, how did we end up getting to this? I don't remember now.
Because you said, would I go back in time?
Would you go back in time?
And we got confused about who the Napoleons were.
Yeah, we did, but you cleared that up. Thank you. And so you'd go back to that just pre-Haussmannian period just to see what Paris looked like back in the day before it got all sort of cleaned up and Haussmannized.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did it look like in those days then? Well,
I think if you look at the Latin Quarter and you look at parts of the Marais, you can see, you know, it's what Haussmann was doing was making wider streets, cleaner, wider streets, because it's very charming now, those narrow streets. Mm-hmm. But we have bathrooms and indoor plumbing, and so I think they were pretty smelly and disgusting.
In those days, they were throwing their waste out into the street, and the streets would have been muddy and disgusting.
And dark.
Yeah. So that's why he made them wider, more uniform. With more infrastructure, some lights. That's why it's called the City of Lights, isn't it? It was the first European capital to have gas lights.
Gas lighting, yeah. It's called the City of Lights because of the gas lighting, and there's also another feeling that it's because of all the Enlightenment.
Right.
And the sort of intellectuals, because Paris is a very old university, and so all the sort of lights of European thinkers kind of came here.
And now it's because of all the traffic lights.
The useless traffic.
You can't drive down the street without hitting about 10 red lights along the way, which a lot of drivers just jump straight through. Okay, so the more grotty, slightly more ramshackle version of Paris.
Well, because we see Paris now, don't we? We see Haussmann's Paris.
Yeah.
And it's not changed. Like, Paris is a city which doesn't change much. It's sort of changed radically, and it's very rare to find in Paris something that changes.
Yeah, that's strange. It's a place that's known for radical change, and yet these days it stays the same.
Yeah. It's not like London, you know, because London had a moment where it was reborn. It's a lot bigger. It's got lost, you know, it's a lot wider, but it was bombed so much in the war that you had all this sort of suddenly this new space. And the whole of the East End, I mean, even when I was in London, you know, I had a friend who lived in Hackney and it was a nightmare getting there, but it was also, it felt poor. Whereas Hackney now, you know, it's changed a lot. So London feels like it changes a lot. I mean, Paris gets more expensive, but it feels like it doesn't change a lot.
In fact, if anything, it just they're very good at protecting it and keeping it the same. I feel. Yeah. Okay.
So, what did it look like before? Would you go back? Would you see a different time?
Maybe. I mean, obviously, I'd bring a packed lunch with me. Because, you know, I'd be curious to go back to various times, but I feel like it would be difficult to get food and there'd be disease everywhere and it'd be all disgusting. And I feel like, I said before that in the past things were a lot more brutal. I feel like if I turned up sort of speaking wrong with the wrong clothes and just turned up in some village somewhere, that within half an hour they would have killed me and burnt me as a witch or something like that, especially if I got my phone out, you know. So I don't know if I'd last very long. But I'd like to have a look at what was going on. What I'd like to do is take a helicopter and fly over Paris during the uprising and just sort of observe what's going on and just sort of like have a look at it all. During
the revolution?
Yeah. That would be quite exciting, wouldn't it? Yeah, but I wouldn't want to actually be on the ground in case I got caught up in all the violence. Yeah, okay. Great stories.
There are good stories. There's always good stories.
Fantastic stories. Okay. So have you told those stories on your podcast?
Yeah. So I just did one about Paris being the city of lights. So that was the last episode. Jeanne de Clisson and the gibbet. Yep. That was a few episodes ago. Did we talk about Napoleon? I mean, they come up all the time, don't they?
That's a really good history lesson for me, though, because I didn't know about Napoleon very much, and I knew that there were Napoleons, not just one. Is it really just two main ones? I mean, there was Napoleon II as well, but like...
Well, Napoleon II it's a bit like kings. So when the king, Louis XVI was the last king, and then when the monarchy is re-established, they jump to Louis XVIII.
Why?
Because Louis XVII, if you were a monarchist, if you believed in the royal family, then Louis XVI's son on his death automatically became king and Louis XVII. And even though he died when he was quite young, he died in prison after his father died, but after the revolution, he was still alive at one point. And so they say, well, he still counts.
Yeah, I see.
And so Napoleon III is the nephew of Napoleon I. So Napoleon I was also a dynasty maker. He wasn't just going to be like, okay, I'm emperor now, someone else can be emperor. He wanted a dynasty. And so he marries an Austrian princess, which must have been like, really, can you imagine?
I know.
Just being like...
She'd be so miserable, wouldn't she? Is that what you mean?
Well, I mean,
Austrian princess. She would be a real pain in the ass, I'm imagining.
But I mean, her aunt was just executed like just a few years earlier.
Even worse, she'd be in a really bad mood.
And she's just like, well, apparently Napoleon was all like, I want to, like, who's the most sort of established? Because he's new, so he wants to be established. And she's like, I'm going to marry an Austrian princess. And they were like, no. And he was like, you have no choice. I'm Napoleon. And they were like, okay, go for it. Have a great wedding. And so he marries this Austrian princess and they have a son.
Okay.
And the son dies.
Okay.
And so he would have been Napoleon II. Do you want to hear a story about Napoleon II?
Of course, yeah. This is the Napoleon II is the son who dies.
Who dies? He never becomes emperor.
It's sad. But how did he get on with his Austrian princess wife, though?
Oh, they seemed all right.
Really? Okay. It's just, being very unfair to Austrian princesses there, obviously, me.
I think Napoleon's quite a cutie. I mean...
Yeah, really?
Yeah. I mean, he gets a bit fat, but who doesn't?
Who doesn't? So his son...
So his son... Well, after he's exiled... His wife goes back to Austria with their son, who dies when he's quite young. So he would have been Napoleon II, and Napoleon III is Napoleon I's nephew. So he sort of says, I am carrying on the dynasty, because he too needs a legitimate reason. He starts off being elected. He was like, I'm just here as the first council. Now I'm emperor.
Yeah, you need, if you're going to put yourself in that position of being like the supreme commander, then you need a pretty good reason other than just like, well, I just turned up when the job was advertised.
Yeah.
It needs to be like, it was my father, my father's father, or my father's father's father. Blood needs to be involved.
Absolutely.
There needs to be some sort of blood contract, isn't there, to make it, legally binding.
Exactly. I mean, this is the whole thing about monarchy and all the rest of it, and so emperors too. And so he says, my legitimate claim to emperor is my uncle was Napoleon, and he did okay, and you all loved him.
And like, I'm Napoleon too. You see, same name, same.
Same. And he was not wrong. The French, they did like Napoleon. I mean, some people did, some people didn't. But so he dies young. But Napoleon Bonaparte is buried, as you probably know, in the Invalides, under the Golden Dome in Paris. There's that the museum, the Army Museum, which was a hospital. It's also a mausoleum for all military people.
Just next to where I work. In fact,
yes.
From many of my classrooms, I get a view of the Invalides.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Really breathtaking. And so Napoleon is buried there, and so is his son. And Napoleon dies in 1820, and he's brought back to France in 1840, in December 1840.
Quite a long time.
The British didn't want to send him back because remember, it's the British that were keeping him prisoner.
He was in St Helena in the South Atlantic when he died.
Is it the Atlantic or the Pacific?
It's the Atlantic.
Oh, I'm so glad you know, because that is very vague to me.
Definitely.
But he was being guarded by the British, and so they kept him. The French wanted him to be sent back, his body, and the British didn't want it because they knew that he was sort of they were going to worship him and kind of make him into a cult. Sort
of like Darth Vader's helmet in the Star Wars prequels.
Absolutely, like Darth Vader's
It's an object that could potentially be quite significant and potent.
Yeah.
Right, so the body of Napoleon, if it was brought back to France, it might rouse the French a bit more. And the English are like, no, just keep it in this little island in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly. Even after his death, they were concerned about his power.
Yeah.
And so finally, he's brought back to France, and it was the monarchy again. In France, they had a big procession. Everyone turns out and they bury him in the Invalides, like he had wanted. And then 100 years later, so that was 1840. So 100 years later, we're in 1940. What's going on in France?
World War II is really digging in.
And who's in charge?
Adolf Hitler.
And where's he from?
He's from Austria.
Exactly. And he's a big fan of
Napoleon.
He really is. And so he does a arguably touching gesture. And he reunites father and son 100 years to the day, and he brings Napoleon's son's body, and it's also buried in the Invalides, and that was his doings.
Oh, okay. Okay, wow.
Ugh, it's uncomfortable.
That was nice of him.
I know, right?
I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well. So no sign of any other Napoleons after the third one. The third one was the one who was the nephew. Not the one who got buried by Hitler with his dad.
Yeah.
But the nephew who went on to, what was it again?
Renovate Paris.
Renovate Paris, exactly, with the help of Houseman. Who makes houses. That's his job. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
The stories keep going and keep going. This is wonderful. But I guess that people should listen to Paname Podcast if you want more of this stuff with some crow noises in the background sometimes.
Have you been with me when we've collected crow noises?
Maybe. Didn't we go to Père Lachaise and you recorded some crows?
Yeah, they really are crows.
Yeah, real crows.
Père Lachaise feels like a ridiculous cemetery.
Or it feels like you're in a Tim Burton movie, doesn't it?
Well, if someone was going to write a cemetery straight out of central casting, like a sort of gothic cemetery, you'd choose Père Lachaise. It feels like it's made up, but it's real. Yeah.
And there are a few famous people buried there, aren't there? Like Jim Morrison famously is buried there. And who else?
Edith Piaf, Oscar Wilde, Proust.
Sting. Don't know why I said that. I thought you were going to start going into like famous people with one name: Proust, Prince, Sting, Beyonce.
That would be good.
Yeah.
And lots of artists, and politicians and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So Jacques-Louis David and Géricault, Ingres, they're there. Delacroix, he's there. Loads of French people, obviously. Some Americans, I think. Apart from Jim Morrison, there's ballet dancers, all sorts of famous people.
Wow. Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Amber. Thank you for coming and telling us a couple of great
Very long stories.
It's really good. The stories weaved in and out of each other like this.
They were complicated.
That was great. So we still need to go to the orangery, so you can tell us about the water lilies.
Yeah, Monet's water lilies. So we've got Monet's water lilies, and we've got we should go to the orangery. It'll be fun.
We should do more cultural visits in Paris where you can tell us things and educate Paul Taylor and me.
Yeah. Mainly Paul Taylor.
Yeah, I guess so.
I've got a quiz for you. I've got an orangery quiz.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so that's going to come at some point as well, listeners. All right. Thank you, Amber. That was brilliant. And listen to her podcast, everyone.
Thank you.
Properly decent and everything.
Yes. Well, thank you, Luke. Thank you for inviting me onto the podcast. It's always great to talk about the stories because I love them.
Yeah.